Once upon a time, in another galaxy, there
sun.
was justice.
Oh, is that the end of the story? Some flash fiction.
Oh, let me just see. There's just this amazing poem, Barbara Kingsolver, about justice won't be a word because it will be the air we breathe. Okay, am I on? Are we up?
Welcome back to Speaking Truth to Goodness. I'm one of your hosts, Patty Robron, and I'm here with Jerry Atkin as we wrap up this transformative season. Today we're rejoined by Andra Vltavín, a trailblazer in political campaigning, who is running for City Council in Portland's District 4 on a platform deeply committed to harm reduction and climate justice. Unlike any other candidate, Andra chose a unique path by opting out of traditional fundraising methods to focus on grassroots activism and eco-friendly campaigning methods. Today, Andra shares their journey through the election cycle, detailing their innovative approach to connecting with voters. From creating chalk art murals instead of using plastic yard signs, to engaging directly with Portland's unhoused population and integrating indigenous wisdom into their campaign, Andra's story is a compelling narrative of what modern, conscious campaigning can look like. Join us as we explore what running a campaign that challenges the norm, prioritizes the environment, and seeks to understand and address the needs of the most marginalized in our community looks like. Let's learn from Andra's experiences and explore how these practices could reshape political campaigning. Here it is.
The idea of me being excited about a local election is almost as wacky as me hanging out with progressive Lutherans. I mean, neither one of those are imaginable, and they're both happening. So, but it's really...
Are you trying to say that pigs are flying?
That's a Barbara Kingsolver novel, isn't it? There's something about... Never mind.
Pigs. I don't know. It's a colloquialism.
Never mind.
It's fine.
You know, okay, so I'll just say say a little more about that. I'm 84. I've been in this battle for a very long time, and with still hope and optimism and joy, but also slightly jaundiced and, sort of like, you've been there, done that, like. So local elections generally have not been the thing that made me excited because they were peripherally important because the system is so corrupt that there's almost nothing you can do just by electing one good person in the midst of the system of city government we've had in Portland is not redeemable. Mm-hmm. No matter how many good people you had in it, you still couldn't fix it. So you start, in the hole, and then you look, wait, this is a true opportunity once in many lifetimes to absolutely start over. Mm-hmm. You get to make peripheral change here, peripheral change there. But this one, if we can pull it off, we could have representative democracy in America.
And that's why we're so lucky, you and I, Jerry, that Andra had the idea to bring together all of the progressive, not all, but like a chunk of the most progressive left-leaning candidates in this race.
Right.
And to connect to all of them, let them come be in our midst and be with us and let us speak truth back to their goodness.
Exactly.
And so it was Andra that got this all set up, and so now they're back here with us to bring it all together.
See, sometimes I have good ideas.
Of course you do.
Let's get Andra back and see what it feels like having gone through this process, what you've learned, how you've grown, what you hope you never have to do again.
Well, but if it goes their way, this might be happening again.
True.
But I just feel like it's the most exciting political experiment of my lifetime.
I agree with you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I want to thank both of you for all of the work that you've done to put this together, because honestly, it was Patty who came to me and said, hey, we should do a podcast. And like, it's been very collaborative. And obviously your input, Jerry, has been so important, and your empathy just comes through in every single one of these episodes. So thank you both for doing this. And yeah, I'm really happy to be back to talk about this really transformational process. And it's obviously not over, but we're really looking at major scale changes. And as it gets closer and closer, I'm really realizing, you said once in many lifetimes, and I completely agree with you. Like at the best case scenario, we've got another charter reform in 10 years. And so between now and then, we've got 10 years to make this work. And I would be surprised if the government went through another iteration this big in 10 years. So I think you're right that this is really, truly a once in a many lifetime opportunity. And for that reason, just as a person who has a personal interest in these liminal transitional spaces, I love being in the midst of this massive, massive change. And yet I still have this sensation, having really seen as much as I can see as a candidate at this point, I still feel like it might not be enough. And I think that that's a really hard sensation to grapple with, because I'm reading books about hospicing modernity and about indigenous anarchy and about, does voting, what does voting mean in terms of if you have if you have sovereignty outside of the U.S., but then, voting makes you a U.S. citizen. And so there's just like all of these layers of complexity and complications. And then even just working with, with mutual aid communities and with unhoused nonprofits working with the unhoused population downtown. And we came up with this idea, me and the director of one of these places that are working with unhoused youth, to come down, and I would do a ranked choice voting training for the youth. That sounded like a great idea. We thought it would be awesome. I went down there, and it became really obvious really quickly that, one, these kids are not thinking that far ahead. There's just no way. They're really living day to day, and voting is the least of their concerns right now. And which is hard, because these are the leaders. The Portland leaders are the ones who are most going to affect their specific situation, but they don't have the bandwidth to care. And that was really hard. And then, you try to update your voter registration. You need an ID number. These kids don't always have that. Getting to the DMV in time to register to vote is like a whole thing that's really just not accessible. Some of the kids technically live out of state or have out of state licenses. And so there's just so many barriers that people don't think about. And so I'm going to all of these campaign and candidate forums where, all of these people who are here, able to listen, able to register to vote, it's an extremely privileged position. And we're voting on issues for people who can't care, who don't have the bandwidth to care. And I see that happening again and again and again. And how can you have any kind of equitable power structure in which the privileged few are making decisions for the people who can't afford to care?
And we are the privileged few.
Right.
Yeah,
and,
it's like...
Right. And it's very tricky, because, okay, then you say, all right, I have privilege, and so I need to go and help. I need to jump into the race. And how much of that is also still just proliferating these systems of power. And it's really tricky, because you don't want to get into a savior complex. Hospicing Modernity, which is a book I'm reading right now, which is amazing, by the way, talks about it's possible to be pulling someone out of the river who's drowning while throwing someone else back in terms of how we think about altruism, especially in the Western world. And so just trying to bring all of those really complicated aspects to this position right now, where we're about 3 weeks from when people start turning their ballots back in. maybe a little bit shorter as the time goes on and this podcast is published. But so this like heavy moment of I've done everything that I can in my own integrity at this point to speak truth at these candidate forums and not just say, this is who I am, this is why I'm different, this is what I want to do, but also what do the people in this room need to hear right now? What would be the most helpful thing that I could say with my minute and a half that might actually change the community regardless of whether I get elected? And that's how I've written every single speech, is what is the most helpful thing that this particular group of people, whether it's the Northwest Business Industrial Association or whether it's the neighborhood association that lives, that's in the neighboring neighborhood to me, what does this group of people need to know about what's going on in our city right now? And that's that between that and volunteering, those are the things that I have been really passionate about in this campaign and have been trying to do to balance what it means to be inside of the system of power. So
I was happy. And now I'm crying.
Oh.
And it reminds me, John Trudell, when the indigenous people occupied Alcatraz, he was the head of AIM. Mm-hmm. And when he was in D.C. protesting, burning a flag on the steps of Congress, some government power set fire to his house, and 3 of his family were killed. Oh. And so he came up with this like, I should have made him kill me. And that's the way I feel. I should have made him kill me. I should have been in their faces every minute of every day until they had to kill me. And I wasn't. So that, more than one thing can be true at the same time. Right. But when you talk about this reality, which is the reality, and it's like, look, we need to start over. We actually need to start over. We don't get that option. Mm. So from my perspective, and I agree with you completely, however transformational this moment is, and it is,
right.
That's in a framework.
Right.
And beneath that framework, there's a framework, and beneath that framework, there's another framework, and it ends up with these kids on the street who have today and maybe tomorrow.
Right.
And that's it. I've come across, again, with this strange group of Lutherans who are working with the houseless community. I mean, amazing people doing amazing things, which are a drop in a drop in a drop of a drop of a bucket. And it's beautiful and worthy of praise. But
it's all drops. That's the thing. We think we're not doing enough because we feel like it's a drop. And we feel like we should do the bucket. But, it's all drops.
Yeah.
And the founding document of the United Mine Workers has a song in it. And I wish I could remember things. I can't. But it's like, many drops can turn a wheel, singly none, singly none. Mm. That's in the founding document of the mine workers. Mm. And by union, what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none. And I believe that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So both things are true for me.
There's this other layer, though, that Andra's been doing, which is you're creating more drops of water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like I've been resonating with people, too. I mean, a lot of times when I do a campaign forum, a lot of the people who come up to me are like, wow, your speech was definitely the most unique, definitely resonated with me the most. You're the only one talking about climate. You're the only one talking about hedge funds and real estate investors. And so, yeah, I do think that it's maybe starting to wake people up to thinking about things a little bit differently. And, that's really a lot of what I can hope for. But I'm also been really exposed to people who are doing really good work in the community. And even just today, I went to a candidate coffee on ending houselessness. And I was a little bit nervous because all of the panelists were not people of color. And I was like, this doesn't sound good, because I'm always nervous about, a group of people who are unaffected by the situation.
It's this episode's phone call.
That's how you know this is in someone's home and not a studio.
What? What are you talking about?
Oh, this is a studio.
This is our glorious studio high above 105th Street.
Exactly.
But yeah, so just went to this candidate coffee about ending unsheltered homelessness, and all the panelists appear to be white people, so I was really nervous. And I actually messaged a whole bunch of people in the nonprofit community, because there were 2 events, one for candidates and one for not. And I was like, you need to be at this if you can at all, because I'm really worried about the people they've selected for this panel, and I really want to make sure that your community gets represented in this conversation. But having just gone to that this morning, it was actually really interesting in that they brought in a lot of specialists from other cities that have drastically reduced their rate of houselessness, and they just kind of talked about how they did it. And so from that perspective, it was really good. It was very informative. It was very much in a collaborative spirit, and I appreciated just having the data and having the opportunity to ask these people questions. But one thing that I was really struck by, which I have really not heard anyone from the private sector really advocating for, it was sharing data with each other. Like, it seems really simple, right? But like, if you have X number of beds in your shelter, every shelter should know that. In fact, everyone in the city should be able to look that up somewhere, right? And there's all of this, we're so trained by copyright and proprietary information to hoard all of that and say like, oh, I don't want them to see what's going on. But actually, we need data in the commons to really serve the community. And that was something that was really heavily advocated for at this panel. And I was like, okay, I'm seeing some of these changes. Like, you don't realize that that's beginning to rebuild the public commons and communal land ownership and all of these things, but it is, and it's important. And so those are the types of things, the little tiny glimmers of hope of just like, okay, I'm seeing that you see the value in not treating this like helpfulness as proprietary. So that was good, at least.
That was a shocking concept.
I know.
Helping is not proprietary. I think I'll make a bumper sticker. Helping is not proprietary.
Yeah, well, it's tricky because everyone... Well, okay, so one thing that has happened is I'll say at these candidate forums, I'm running my campaign for less than $1,000, and I've turned donations away. I've suggested that people go donate to local charities or mutual aid groups instead, which I feel really good about. But I've had people, more than one person, come up to me and say, it would be cool if they could donate in your name so you could keep track of it. And I'm like, I have no desire to keep track of it. I have no desire to take that credit. I do not want it. I do not want it. I do not need it. I do not need to publicize it anywhere. This is just the integrity of my platform. That's it. I don't want the metrics. I don't need to spend the money to get those metrics. I just want to encourage community members to go and do that, to think about where they're putting their money and be thoughtful. That's all I want. And so it's just really interesting because I'm constantly confronted with these narratives of, okay, but you need to use that information to get power. You need to, and it's just not the way I want to work as a human being.
But you are using your power and it's having an effect. But it's the kind where people are not going to be able to draw a straight line between the changes that are happening and Andra Vltavín.
Yeah.
The connection won't be there because you've done it in a way that is full of integrity, that isn't a click on me because I said a thing, right? Like you are elevating that conversation with your speech that's different everywhere you go. And so now you're seeing it. You're seeing your clouds of force that were just like mist put in there, but you're seeing it now because you're hearing it come back to you.
Yeah.
So you know that like you elevated that conversation, but you won't get the credit.
Yeah. And I really learned that there really need not be heroes That's that heroes are all about place and time and moment. And what's more important is that you have a community of people who could at any time be heroes, and that they're all lifting each other up constantly, and none of them are looking for opportunistic ways to use that power.
Heroes don't make history. People do.
Right.
You know the program Scared Straight? You're familiar with that? It's where sort of at-risk youth are taken into prisons, and lifers, people who are in for life, explain to them what it's like to be in prison, and they're, in a sense, scared straight. It's been going on for decades. It's an amazing program. The amazing person who actually lives here, who was the catalyst for that, it was the warden of the prison. He gets all the credit. And every time he says, I did not do this, the inmates did this. And it's like he's been saying that for 30 years, and he's still very passionate about it. There's no need for credit. All we need is for things to change. It doesn't matter who does it. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, we live in a world where being visible gives you a certain kind of leverage to do. But it's never about that person.
Yeah.
Never about that person.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as I've been campaigning and watching other people's campaigns and experiencing my own, I've really noticed that it's not the candidate running. They're running as an entire community. All their volunteers, all of their campaign staff, their family. It affects all their friends. It affects everybody. And to put one single name on that community makes no sense to me. It's not very transparent. Like, okay, cool, paid for friends of Andra Vltavín. What does that mean? Who are those people? Where do they come from? You know, and so yeah, that's been just kind of bizarre. Just the putting of like, we're going to put this one name forward for this entire community, or this set of communities even, and yeah, it's wild. And so there's also this interesting trade-off of being that visible also invites a lot of hardship and a lot of public attack. And there were definitely phases of this campaign where I was definitely afraid for my safety. And, you know, safety is an illusion anyway, and we could go into a whole conversation about that as well. But yeah, I mean, for the whole second half of my campaign, having run for about a year now, I was genuinely afraid of particular people who would threaten to come to events that I was attending. And it was just, I had to just keep doing it anyway. Like, I knew that I couldn't back down. That's what they wanted, right? So, and it was interesting because of the way of running my campaign on very low amounts of funding. I did slip under the radar of some people who I think would have really made things difficult for me. And I'm seeing that happen to other progressive candidates in other districts who are much more visible and have a lot more funding. They're getting some pretty vicious attacks and have been for a while. So there's this, like, when you are one person, it's also, you know, you're more likely to be a martyr for the cause, which is not good. It's not useful. It's dangerous and it's scary. And I knew I was signing up for that in running. I knew that would be part of this. And definitely there's a lot of just like, you're constantly under scrutiny with the press. And there's a lot of that too, which has been difficult to navigate. And just the way that people expect you to talk to the press versus how the press wants you to talk to them. And I just want to be transparent. I don't want to hide anything. So it's just like, there's so many things to think about. And so much of that you have to just navigate in real time on your own. And it's really hard to make those split-second decisions.
By setting this example, that's actionless activity. I have this concept that's been with me a long time, is that we learn from each other. We don't learn from facts. We don't, we sort of experience some, but it's what you embody, and you do it so well and so purely, and that people see that example and say, huh, that's possible. I want to be like that. I believe that's how change takes place. So just by being present in a principled way, in an environment which is more principled than most, but still has some of the same contradictions because we live in under capitalism and contradiction. So I want to be clear that from my perspective, that what you're doing has an importance and a power beyond what you're doing.
I hope so.
I am so grateful. I mean, yeah, I can. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I think there was a particular moment that really lit that up for me, in that we were at this, I think it was a forum at Lincoln High School, which it's kind of a notorious forum. It's probably one of the most divisive ones that happened, in that it was everyone's been struggling with how do you have a candidate forum with 30 candidates, right? That's a lot. That's a lot to manage from an organizational standpoint. And so this forum, their idea was to have yes or no questions, and each of the candidates would hold up a yes or a no if they agreed with the statement. The problem was that the questions were not really yes or no questions. They were they were a little bit more broad, right? So, and the candidates did not engage well with that. I would say that they were, the whole point was it was supposed to be a silent forum, but I will tell you what, there were candidates yelling out their answers. They were yelling at the organizers were yelling at them. It was a mess. But the one really lovely highlight from that event was they asked all of the District 4 candidates who showed up, and District 4 is where Linton is. That's everything west of the Willamette River, Selwood, Reed, Eastmoreland. So it includes the critical energy infrastructure hub. So one of the questions was, will you prioritize public safety over private investments as it relates to the CEI hub? Every single candidate said yes. Every single one.
Liars. Sorry.
Maybe.
I hope
Maybe.
so,
Right. But like that for me, like so much of this campaign has been trying to educate people on what the CEI hub even is.
Yeah.
Let alone, talk about the public safety issues of it. So for me, it was like every single person up here knows what the CEI hub is and why it's dangerous. And like, if that's not what I set out to do, then I don't know, right? And the whole audience just applauded immediately when there was a yes across the board, right? So the public knows what that means. The candidates know what that means. And obviously, this is not just an effort that I led. It's been so many different organizations that have said like, hey, you need to give us your answer on what you'll do with this problem. But for me, it just really represented like, if you had asked the same group of people a year ago what they thought about this question, they would have no idea what you're talking about. So that for me, it was just, we have really made the most of this moment of honestly, like really, really tightening the need for people to get educated on these issues. And we have changed dramatically the public landscape of whether or not they know about the issues going on. And that for me has been a really, really positive, like across the whole community, not just the candidates, but everyone in Portland right now has a better awareness of what's going on than they did a year ago. And that for me is a win. That's huge. It will make a big, big difference in what's to come.
Especially with the new city council that might actually be responsive to the public.
Yeah. The thing that I am worried about, and as a candidate, this only continues to become more and more true, is that so many of the candidates will make promises. They'll say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to prioritize this. And they can say that. Everybody can say that. But none of us really know the full situation. None of us really have all of the numbers and the budgets in front of us. None of us have a transparent look at how, even on a day-to-day basis, this new government is supposed to run. Nobody knows like in reality, in practice, what this is going to look like. And there's just no way to get that information before you are elected. So it makes perfect sense to me why there's so many times where a politician will promise a bunch of things in their campaign and probably really fundamentally believe that they're going to do them, and then get into office and see the actual situation and know and find out that they cannot. And I don't understand. I mean, if we had a true democracy, fighting words there maybe, but we would have a lot more transparency around, hey, this is the actual situation, everyone. We are $20 million short. And so what do we do? How do we handle this as a community? How can we, bring in support and figure out which of these programs is really vital? But instead, it's like there's jargon, there's difficult language, the PDFs are really difficult to understand, and all of it's everywhere. It's just not being managed very well, and it's not being handed off very well. And there's not a lot of understanding there, and that's what worries me.
So interesting. So the daughter-in-law of my neighbor around the corner is a labor attorney who litigates against the city quite a bit, who says that all the candidates for mayor are fascists, but not all of them, but almost all of them, which is scary. But she also says it's really clear, if this model is implemented correctly, city councilors will be community organizers. That is going to be their job. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be running a bureau. They're not going to be doing any of that. So, and again, from the candidates that we've talked with, community organizing is pretty much on everyone's tongue. But the barrier is we have a populace that's so beaten down. And that's my fear for the election, is that people can't grasp that they actually have power. And they actually do. There was another idea in there. There's this concept that the people in power want us to feel less powerful than we are.
Well, obviously.
But just think about it. People learn that they have no power. It is hammered in every way, in practice and in language. And so the first step is to rip off that bandage and say, no, you do have power, but you have to embody it. You have to actually do it. That process is going to go on over years. The question is, do we have enough to get us over this first hurdle? And then the possibility of it goes up, but we can do it.
But what I hear you saying is that you're seeing that, like, yes, we have the opportunity to have a different story told about who we're putting in this position, but you're concerned that every system surrounding those council positions will mean that hands are tied, because the backroom deals you'll get whispered to you, this is how this actually works, so get on board. Like, are you at that level of thinking that's what this is about? I have a follow-up after that.
Yeah.
Go.
So I actually think that the backroom deals are going to be next to impossible with this new form of government. I think that it's going to be very difficult, because instead of just trying to convince one person who runs the whole bureau to do something, which is pretty easy, you have to convince 7, because there's nothing that one counselor has enough control over for you to sway them. So except if you get all 12 people's attention at once, then maybe, but I think that that's going to be really difficult. So I'm not worried about that, actually. I think that is like problem solved as far as I'm concerned. What I am worried about is money. And you have all of these line items that are not super clear, like, just to throw out some examples, like, Portland Street response. Well, obviously we want to fund that, or I do, at least. Most of the candidates do, right? Okay. Well, all right, so we have, these housing programs. So we have to fund the joint Office of Houseless Services. Okay, that's important. Yeah, we're going to do that. And then you have community programs that were added to the government budget, like, for instance, Rose City Self-Defense, which helps people learn how to defend themselves and feel empowered in the community. And it's a really wonderful program. And there's a lot of public support for that program. But, you start to wonder, is this essential if we have to make $20 million worth of cuts? And I'm not saying that any of those services are not essential, but like, you are going to have to make those prioritizing decisions. And, Rose City Self-Defense and some of the gun violence protection programs are doing a lot of work to work toward fixing the root causes of a lot of the violence in our city. And so if you defund that community program, then those root causes come back, right? Because you're looking at like, oh, but this is a community program, so it's not the government's job to fund it. But look at what it's doing for your community and how much of that is untrackable, how much of that is just not metrics that organization can provide you. And so that's what I'm worried about, is that we're going to get into a situation where we have 12 people looking at a very complicated budget and not know how to handle this well. And especially when we have a new city administrator and we're doing all of that labor for the very first time, how is all of that going to get balanced? And it's going to be tricky. And I think we're going to have to be really, like, I really want people elected who are going to be very thoughtful about, is this money being spent effectively? What things is this service doing for the community that aren't trackable? And, what are other cities doing that is successful, that is costing less money? I think is a really big thing that we have to be looking at. And there are a few candidates who talk about that, but not many. And mostly it's like, I want to solve this problem and I care about this problem. And we're like, okay, but how? Where? Why?
First year is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be really, really hard with the best will. And even if we get a good council that we were comfortable with, just getting these two systems to transition and connect in a way is a bureaucratic nightmare. Mm-hmm. And, it's going to take the first year I know is going to be very challenged. Second year probably, but the thing that I'm most worried, two things I'm worried about is, one, people who don't feel like they have not felt like they've had power are not going to engage. So they're not going to take that opportunity. And the other is, guess who actually chooses the city manager? The mayor.
Well, yes, but it has to be confirmed by the city council. Yeah. So,
but that's a very key. Yeah. And a good city manager can make all the difference in the world.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that search process. And there's out there some visionary city manager who wants to take on a real cesspool of corruption and fix it. And I believe there will be people out there who really want that challenge. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of pieces that have to fall right for us to get the maximum. And then going back really to that different scale of your belief that you've been able to educate an entire group of activists of one form or another, so there's a victory already, and that'll never be undone. Doesn't matter what happens. Mm-hmm. And that provides a basis for organizing, a basis for reclaiming power. Yeah. That's there. So we've already won. Mm-hmm. Now we just want to win big. First, in some ways, that sense of making people believe again that it's possible to stand up for what you believe. It's possible to stand up for your rights. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, so there's a tipping point. So it's going to look difficult. And then if we're lucky, we're going to reach the tipping point. And I think even the victory of this change of government becomes a huge lever for unlocking all that energy that's locked up. Mm-hmm. There I go getting hopeful again. Damn, what's wrong with me?
Well, I keep thinking about the money piece and how, like, because to me that makes perfect sense that all the good intentions trying to operate within capitalism are like, well, what are we doing, guys? And so, it's like, well, we're still doing the right thing. You're still doing the right thing, trying to get into positions in government. But obviously that's just one layer. Right? Because you did something with education for a particular group of people, the candidates you're running with. But we all can do that probably. And I don't know if you see that as the main force of this other layer that needs to be going on. But this is a thing I keep playing with in my head, like this idea that change isn't like the great names of one person. It is just all the drops of what people are doing. But that happens because we are talking about these ideas, because we're doing the ideas. It makes other people realize they can do something too.
Right.
And so it's like, it's this building of an energy. Sorry to be a little woo about that. But right, it's a building of an energy. And like, if we are hopeful and we are joyful in what we see as possible and other people see it as possible too, well, fuck, there's a tipping point. If enough people see it's possible, it happens. And I don't know that you can force that.
So how many sort of forums and level of outreach to college students?
Almost none. And here's the reason, is not all of them are technically voters in the city. Very few of them are voters in the city. I would say there's been one candidate forum at PSU, and I did some outreach at Lewis and Clark, but most of them actually technically live in other cities. They live in other states, so there's not a lot to be done with that community, honestly.
Which is unfortunate because they're this sort of link.
Yeah.
And so one of the most fun things, 25 years actually in November, the WTO demonstrations in Seattle, we did a lot of sort of teach-ins. And teach-ins are really cool because we got to find some way to get that sort of bridge population. Because they're going to be energized and active for a long time if the catalyst is there for them.
For sure, yeah, and I think we've seen that with continued protests on behalf of Palestine. We just had the anniversary of a year of resistance on top of everything since the original Nakba. But and so we're continuing to see that in the city, and I think that's really important, and I've continued to support those efforts. Despite some,
but I understand what you're saying are the limiting factors.
Right. Yeah.
You didn't have to be voting in Portland for us to organize.
Right.
To go to Seattle and have way more fun than we thought we were going to have.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that surprised me, in that I thought I would be doing a lot of outreach to that population, and it just wasn't the time. But to go back to your kind of comment and question, Patty, I've really found that with community organizing, there's two parts. The first part is those fruiting body moments, to use that mycelial metaphor I've used before, but those fruiting body moments where there are 100,000 people in the street, where for whatever reason, whether it's COVID, whether it's jobs, whether there's some reason you might not ever know why,
exactly,
but there's just a moment where everyone feels really inspired to do the same thing at the same time, and at that point, then you're like, okay, how can we boost this movement? How can we bring everything we have to make ourselves visible, to say, hey, also this issue is related. Hey, we've already done the research on this. Hey, we've already got a community around this that can support this and encourage that flood, and then allow that to build the more mundane daily relationships that really actually cement the network, which is the second part, is you have to be building the network. You have to be doing the research. You have to be preparing for those fruiting body moments, knowing that you do not know when they will happen, but they will happen.
So you're seeing the fruiting body moments as the catalysts more than like the mycelial network going, or it's a both.
It's
right?
It's
Like
both.
spreading
Yeah,
underneath
it's
and
very
then-
tandem. And for me, as I'm building my movements, mostly mutual aid, and we've done a lot of climate activism together. It's tricky to do both. And something I've learned from the neighborhood emergency teams actually is that the person who is a good leader in a blue skies, everything is good scenario is not necessarily the person who's a good leader in an all-out emergency scenario. And so really thinking about, like, does your organization have people who are really good at maintaining and sustaining energy, and people that are really good at acting in those fruiting body moments? And for me, that has all come down to who are the people who are immediately local to me? Who are my neighbors? Who are the people that are just always here that I will have to rely on in the event that I can't travel, that, the bridge is out, that the services I need are not there, that the grocery stores are closed down, that who am I relying on? And building that network is more important, in my personal opinion, and based on disaster resilience research, than joining together with people on different ends of the city who agree with your political values.
Yeah.
That's so we're talking about the farm workers, Woodburn. They have a geographical base, they have a language base, they have a work base. When we're trying to organize by pulling people from all over into it, it's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't have roots. Because we're using plant metaphors.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that kind of organizing isn't critical. Everything is.
Right.
But I think what you're saying, and I the principle is, the idea is, you need a real base. Is what you're talking about. Your neighbors, maybe the people you work most closely with, even if they're not your neighbors, and you build out from that. Because it's really hard to do it the other way, is to build something and then try to root it.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
Right.
But that's
marketing, right?
I came up with one of my famous things. There's the fierce urgency of now and the fierce urgency of the long haul. And what you're talking about is the long haul.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is coming at us, but if this other work isn't being done, but it's really difficult for people to understand the amount of work that's necessary to break the sort of bound energy of the community because of all this brainwashing and horror around them. But in the long run, we cannot be successful without both.
Yeah.
That's hard. It's a difficult, it's a very difficult choice.
Yeah.
We all like an answer. Here's how you do it.
Yeah. And more and more that, like, I'm noticing, and as I'm reading a whole bunch of different authors right now, one of the things that people say over and over again is, like, the need to have an answer, the need to have a simple solution that works right now is an artifact of white supremacy. Like, that is part of this false sense of urgency. We have to be uncomfortable with the reality that there are no easy answers. With everything is contextual, everything. And so I've really, really tried to sit with that. And anytime someone comes up to me at a candidate event or, out in the public about, oh, we should just do this. It's like, okay, well, have you considered this factor? And have you considered this factor? And I really kind of tried to guide them to an understanding that this is a really complex problem. It's going to need a set of solutions, not just one solution. But I do think that, and something I've been talking about also, is that in times of fear, when there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of change happening, climate disasters occurring, we've got hurricanes, we've got ice storms, we've got fires, we've got floods, and everything else. And on top of the election and all of the change there, on top of all of this global unrest and resistance and independence movements, all of that makes the person who is fairly comfortable in their present environment scared. And that fear historically leads people to elect officials and to make decisions that are based in control. And that is what I'm really afraid of, is that if the majority of voters in Portland feel safe enough right now, but have a sensation that they might not be safe forever, that they will vote toward sort of more law and order candidates. Right. Because there's not an understanding that is just going to prolong all of the problems that we're currently dealing with. Because, for instance, just as an example, so I do mutual aid downtown with a bunch of unhoused folks. They come up and they get supplies, they get food, they get company. We listen to their stories, and it ends up being kind of a Skillshare event, and it's really lovely, and we do this every week. One thing that I hear constantly is, I got out of prison X number of years ago and immediately started living on the streets and been there since. And so if our solution to, say, the houselessness crisis is to imprison people, you're just kicking that can down X number of years. So you're actually housing people in one of the most expensive ways possible, and you're not solving the problem at all.
Holy shit.
Right. So you're spending all of this money to get them off the streets so that you don't have to look at the problem. That's the only thing you're doing in jailing them, is making it so that people are not having to look at the problem every day.
Right. We're protecting the privileged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just boggles my mind, because then, they get out and they have even less prospects. So you're actually making the situation worse over time. Right. And it's insane. But at the same time, you're like, okay, well, obviously these people need housing. Obviously these people need support and services, and we need to go and ask them what they need and really listen to them so that we're not just assuming we know, right? But it's also, I'm finding as I go to more and more of these candidate info sessions about this issue, like, it's really complicated because, for instance, we have the CHAT program, which is the Community Health Assess and Treat program, and Portland Street Response. So the CHAT program is more medically focused, and the PSR is more behavioral health focused overall. And they both try to connect people with services, and they're both underneath the fire department, and their goal is to try to prevent people from needing to call 911 for everything, because both CHAT and PSR are serving the same 5,000 to 8,000 people. Like, those are most of their calls, in the same population of mostly unhoused folks who continually call 911 because they don't have health insurance, they don't have benefits, they don't have access, they don't have transportation, they don't have all of these things. And so we're also like putting a significant strain on our healthcare system for not housing these people. But if we just say, here's a voucher to go get a hotel room, here's an apartment, if they're not also getting community care, if they're not getting mental health treatment, if they don't have the option for addiction services, they might cause harm to the people who are in that housing community. They might cause harm to themselves. A lot of what I've been really surprised to hear is that, especially in the youth, so being 16 to 25, if they're given, a voucher for a hotel room, that causes a really high rate of suicide, because you're taking those kids out of the community that they have as an unhoused person, putting them into a room where they don't really know how to take care of themselves. They don't know how to access services. They can't bring any of their friends over because the owners of the business don't want random strangers coming in and out all the time. There's all these restrictions, and it's led to a lot of youth suicides. And so it's a really, really complicated problem. And if we keep giving people piecemeal services, we're going to continue to cause all of the same problems. We can't just give them housing. We can't just give them drug and addiction treatment. We can't just give them mental health services. But I think what has been the most shocking thing to learn about the whole housing crisis for me is that a lot of what we're doing right now is essentially housing people in the hospital. And that's taking up a lot of resources, and partly because there's, I believe it's a law or some kind of just standard around a hospital cannot charge someone for the same thing twice in a 30-day period. So it's to protect from basically predatory medical practices, right? Okay. So on paper, it looks good, but it means that the healthcare system and the government is having to cover the expenses if someone goes into the hospital for the same thing within the same 30-day period. And so, so it creates the situation where we have a lot of beds being taken up by unhoused individuals who are having chronic problems repeatedly. And again, like, that's even more inexpensive way to house them than jail.
Right.
And then once they're quote unquote better, whatever that means in the context of that healthcare situation, they just put them straight back out on the street. So it's a little bit insane. And then on top of all of that, the city has lost so much trust from the unhoused population because of the sweeps, because of the enforcements, because of really chronically understaffed shelters that have caused really unsafe conditions, because of reports of human trafficking in shelters, because of violence and all of these things. So as an unhoused person, I encounter quite a number of unhoused people who will refuse shelter out of a fear for their own safety. And I tell people this and they're absolutely mind boggled, because they're like, how can they think it's safer to sleep on the streets than to sleep in this shelter? And like,
have you been in the shelter?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so so all of this, and like, I guess just on a human level, learning all of this and holding all of this, I'm just, it's a lot, right? Like it's so much, and we can't just keep relying on our government officials to hold it all. I think that's really something else I've learned, is that we as a community, we have to collectively hold this grief and collectively work towards solutions, because we can't count on whoever 12 people are elected to solve all of these problems for us and keep all of this information behind closed doors. We all have to hold a piece of this.
So I don't remember who it is that we talked to, but is the head of the neighborhood association.
Probably KJ.
Kelly Janes, yeah.
Yeah,
KJ.
and they're doing, people in the neighborhood cook food and bring it, even if it's just once a week. If the neighborhood is now involved in the reality, it's no longer an abstract issue, it's no longer a headline. And these people are now human beings as opposed to trash. I mean, the idea that people could be trash is unimaginable, except that's exactly what people think of houseless people as trash. Yeah. And it's, what's happened to us?
Well,
where did we go wrong?
I mean, the things you're saying, Andra, like, my first colloquialism in my head is, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, which I think is true, except it's like a fucking mega octopus, not just two hands, right? Because this has to be such a holistic and high level perspective in order to see how all these pieces like relate or miss each other while everyone is actually trying and people do actually care.
Another candidate really talked about that with us.
These unhoused people, right? So I mean, in
Someone
ways, it's
has
like
to hold the larger picture.
Yeah, like a czar. Did I hear that word
the
tossed around? The idea of like, we have a housing department, we have all these different whatever bureaus handling things, but there's not like a department of let's get everyone in houses, a department of let's make sure everyone has food. Like, why the fuck don't we have those departments?
Well, I think it's really complicated because, for instance, the Government Transition Advisory Committee is coming up with all of these suggestions for different committees that the counselors should serve on to focus on. Okay, we're going to have maybe like a housing committee and a climate committee and an equity committee. But if you silo them like that, like equity should be an integral and foundational part of every committee.
Yeah.
Climate should be a really important lens on every committee decision, right? And so like the more that we separate and silo these issues, the less easy it is to see the overall picture.
Well, that's what I mean. Like with our actual things we're trying to solve, and we're trying to like solve it through our silos instead of going, all right, well, here's how things operate. Now what to solve this?
Right. And I'm not going to come up with a perfect solution for this in any means. Like I will use my best judgment as a human being with empathy and mindfulness. But what I see that could work better than saying like, okay, you're in charge of food and you're in charge of housing, is to have it be hyper local. To have like, okay, you and like, granted, the neighborhood association model is not perfect. It needs a lot of work and a lot of support and a lot more diversity. But the idea of having these hyper local government entities is a good one, because it should be a place where people feel safer bringing up issues that are happening in their community, so that we have more eyes on the problems. And then we say like, hey, for this community, it's really important that we do X. So we're going to forward that on to a bigger community that has the funding to do X, who can say like, hey, I'm looking at 5 different neighborhoods and they're saying this one needs this and this one needs this and this is why. Okay, yes, we're going to fund these projects that we have bandwidth for. So it's more about specific locations than it is about specific specific topics, because you can't just separate the topics. Everything is connected to everything. And so if you focus on instead the actual localities, you might actually get somewhere, and then everyone has vision into every aspect of the problem.
So if that were to happen, like, let's say with the unhoused population, and we want to look at it like in a neighborhood specific way, do you see that as being something where like all the neighborhoods then get to talk to each other, and so it's hyper local even if that same idea is replicated over and over and it ends up functioning more like a single system? I mean,
it has to.
Is that
right,
that's the thing. It's like a weird balance of like hyper local, but also we could, like not duplicate labor all over. And,
right.
It's
right. So this is a really interesting thing to talk about. So I think that the district model that we have now with the 4 districts of Portland is a really good step that direction of saying like, okay, each of these have some unique issues. They, we have specific representation for these districts so that these 3 counselors can focus on this district and really get to know it and really represent it, so that they're bringing that unique perspective to it. So I think that's a good start. But in a city of 650,000 people, dividing that by 4 doesn't really make that a more manageable number. So, and the neighborhood associations as they are not equipped to handle more than they do right now, which is not much. I mean, like maybe they plan a neighborhood get-together party twice a year, right? Like that's the level of bandwidth that the neighborhood associations currently have. And I would really, really like to see that expanded, and maybe for that to even be a paid role in the long distant future, probably. But what you're saying, so one of the things that was suggested at the panel to end unsheltered homelessness today was to have day shelters, 1 in each district. And so there was always a place where all of the unhoused population could go during the day to seek services, and it would function kind of like a micro city where you could get everything you need there. You could get food, you could get your food stamps, you could get help with getting your ID, you could get referrals to drug and health treatment centers, and everything's there. And I think that's great, because you can't expect people to travel to seek those services, right? They have to seek their services where they are. And if, for instance, if we just say like, oh, well, I guess there's the highest population of unhoused people down in Old Town, we should just put all the services in Old Town. That puts an incredible burden on Old Town, which is already overburdened and has a lot of difficulty navigating all of that. So really what I would like to see is we have houseless services in every single neighborhood. And I don't know how feasible that is exactly, but every district is a really good start. And we can obviously share the models of like, hey, this is what's really working over here, absolutely duplicated over there. But we have to really think about how feasible it is for people to have transportation to seek these services. And so if we really, really keep that piece in mind, then we can see which things are more conceptual and more cerebral that can be, upper level government in terms of like city government, county government, and which things do need to be hyper local because they're more physical services, because people need to physically access them. And so, yes, it absolutely needs to be duplicated. You need to have more than one grocery store in your city, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm meaning like duplication of systems, but yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of long-term priorities, the neighborhood association system is very strong in Portland, has control by property owners,
Yeah,
by and large.
for sure.
Some neighborhood associations aren't. So the transformation, I would think, if I were elected to be a city council person, that would be one of the things that would be a priority, which would be to activate these local institutions that exist, have roots that need to be re-understood, reinterpreted, reimagined. That's, again, a long-term process. But in the end, what do you have? You actually have a functional base for dealing with real humans in real circumstances. And in a sense, you can't do it from afar, no matter how good your intentions are. So it's like the rewilding. It's like the idea of we need to rewild, we need degrowth. Though it's a terrible name. No one will ever get excited about degrowth. So we have to find new language. But those are really important concepts. But they're over a long period of time. The idea of putting services together came up in the early 20th century. Settlement houses, which were the sort of purview of social work, was to create environments like the ones that you're talking about. And in cities, there were literally, big tenements settled that became the sort of center. And so they were in the center of what was going on. And so the idea is so old and so simple and so clear and so ignored that it's really, the mind does boggle a little bit. Mm-hmm. But amazing things happen.
Yeah, and I mean that was also talked about on the panel. Is like, if you just ask people what they need, they will tell you. Like, I don't know why this is a novel concept. Like, if you just ask them what they need, they will tell you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that piece of safety and getting a good night's sleep is a pretty good precursor to figuring that out. If you have a little bit of time to think about it, maybe.
But it's messy.
Yeah.
It's messy, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's so much embodied harm. I just came up with a new term. I don't know. I mean, it's a dangerous world. It's dangerous. It's not safe. Your life is at risk every day, either in the immediacy or over time. That's pretty serious. So that should be addressed with the people. So that's
especially when you're talking about the unhoused populations, like
right.
They're much more likely, I would imagine, to have had a lot less feelings of safety in their life.
Is Right to Dream 2 still around?
Yeah.
Is
Definitely.
Ibrahim Mubarak still around?
I don't know.
Because he was such a brilliant, amazing,
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that, yes, the unhoused population does experience a lot less safety, a lot more exposure to all kinds of different hazards. I mean, you name it, they're going through that trauma. But what I also see is that people who are not living in that situation are still acting like they need to distrust at that level. Like, they're seeing someone else's crisis and internalizing it and acting from that place of fear. And I really want to encourage people to instead move toward a place of trust as a default state. If we do not trust each other, we cannot collaborate. cannot solve these problems. So we have to operate from a very radical, vulnerable state of tenderness and care, knowing that almost no one else wants to cause harm. Mm-hmm. And then act from that place and collaborate from that place. Because if we just assume distrust, if we assume malice, we're never going to get anywhere. And I just really, I mean, there are people living day to day on the streets who don't have the privilege of that radical vulnerability, but it's necessary if you do. It's really, truly, fundamentally necessary. And I think that is the biggest disservice that our media has done, is really overplay the amount that we need to distrust each other.
Yes. That's how they make money.
That's the sole reason
That's
for
how
local
things
news
get sold.
existing, is to make us afraid.
I mean, it's capitalism once again.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is. It runs everything. And yeah. I just want to I've noted something since you've been here today. Early on, when you were here for your episode and the early episodes of this season, it was clear that your focus was pretty hardcore climate. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's changed. Mm-mm. But I see you shifting how you see climate. Mm-hmm. And your focus seems much more about unhoused people. But I don't think, to me, that's connected because, everything's connected. But anyway, sure. I feel like, are you looking at it as compassion first and the rest will follow? Or what has pulled you away from directly fighting the oil industry to no, I'm going to get in the dirt and bring food to my neighbors? Yeah,
it's a really good question. And I think coming to my campaign from a climate background, I felt like I knew a lot of what those issues were. And so a lot of my learning in the last year has come from being directly interacting with the unhoused population. And so that's where a lot of my learning has occurred. And I have definitely learned about new climate strategies. I think the biggest one that I came into contact with, there are some cities in Washington that are doing cost analysis and estimates on how much it's going to cost to adapt to climate change on a yearly basis. And getting that number and dividing that number by all of the known polluters in the city and charging them that much money every year. And that's great. That's awesome. And we should definitely be using that model. I think it's a really new model, so I'd like to see how it plays out a little bit in terms of how hard the corporations fight that, because I imagine it's going to be a lot. And also really good news around the risk bonding for the CEI hub. The Multnomah County is slated to vote that into effect at the end of the year. So I do think there are a lot of really good strides happening on the climate front. PSEF has been pretty well defended this year, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and we're looking at shade equity strategies. And I still really think that it's really important to come at every problem from a climate lens. But I've also read books like The Intersectional Environmentalist that really say, if you aren't looking at the intersectionality of all of these issues, then I'm so sorry about the word. I know.
Said intersectionality.
But that's what the book is called. So, but it's really talking about how all of this is related, because it's patriarchy, it's capitalism, it's our separation from nature, and for me too, what I don't hear enough people talking about with regard to the housing crisis is how much of our desire for housing is related to our desire to be separate from nature, and just that tension of why is it somehow more natural for us to feel like living in a box is the thing we should be doing as opposed to living on the land, and just the pushback that receives. What if an unhoused person, you offer them shelter and they say, no, I really prefer to live off the land? That is right now a criminal activity. So, right? And so how much of that separation from nature is driving all of these other problems? And how much can we be looking at the unhoused populations and saying, you are the closest to nature out of anyone in this city right now? With exception to maybe some of the indigenous community members that are really working toward changing the riverfront and the waterfront and doing the river cleanup and all of that. But they're on the streets. They're exposed to the elements. They know how bad the land is hurting right now. And as such, like those are the people that I think is really important to listen to and to be present with. And then simultaneously, I've been really trying to push back against this idea that, oh, we need more housing, we need to build these more things, we need to, do this and that and the other thing, because we have so many vacant buildings and we need to repurpose them, and we need to be really creative about sustainable solutions for all of these things. And so as we're addressing these really complex problems, climate is absolutely 100% a part of it. And I definitely bring that up in every speech and continue to advocate for all of that, but it hasn't been the biggest place that my learning has taken place. And I really have, I think, doubled down on the idea that we cannot continue to live in a world with this many private vehicles. It's just not tenable, because switching to electric vehicles we can't do it. We can't do it without completely devastating several countries in Africa and a lot of the wild spaces left by mining all of the things that we would need to build those cars and build those batteries. We can't do it. We cannot do it. And so what does it look like to really, truly be transitioning away from private vehicles toward public transit, toward car share programs, toward bike infrastructure, toward pedestrian infrastructure? Because it's absolutely delusional to think that we can continue to live in a world with this many private vehicles. And saying that at a forum gets me more vitriol than anything else I say. But it's so important. We have been so brainwashed to think that transportation should be on demand. And it is absolutely ruining the earth. Like, just more than anything else, in every possible way, from damaging wild spaces to equity issues to power dynamics to our separation from nature to obviously the carbon issues in the atmosphere. It is absolutely the number one driving force.
So what you're telling me is those issues are intersectional.
Yeah, right. Yes.
It's true.
It's cool that our big climate events for the globe fly everyone to Azerbaijan. That's cool. That was good plan. It's not like if only we could invent some technology where we could all, interact in a digital space without all the, I guess there's still carbon involved, but without all that flying, that'd be kind of nice. Right?
It'd be hard to do backroom deals
over Zoom.
Of course, AI could take it over and talk to itself.
It's fine.
No, I know. It's like, at some level, everything has to start on the ground with the people who are living there.
Yes.
And this idea that science will save us, or whatever it is. So again, I come back to the hopeful reality that look what you learned over the last 6 months or less, right?
For sure.
And how articulate you might be about that, and how passionate, I don't know, like it's almost as if you cared, and you're willing to put your body on the line.
Yeah.
We have to put our bodies on the line. We have to put whatever the form, and I feel like I've had the opportunity for a lot of my life to do that. I have less opportunity now, which frustrates me in a small way. But I think I've learned so much in the last 10 years. Lee got sick, died, and those things that I kind of knew, now I do feel like are embodied in a different way. It's like, that's why you can make me cry easily, because we're connected to everything. All the pain in the world, we're connected to it. Or at least I am. I don't know about other people. So once you tap that capacity for empathy and compassion, suffering with, your world, the way you see the world changes completely. And we're diverted from that in so many ways.
But if you connect to the pain of others, do you also connect to the joy of others?
It's been known to happen. But right now there's more pain in the world than there is joy.
Is there?
I think so. Just saying.
Or is it the media talking?
Well, there is more, the rest state for more people is pain than it is joy.
Yeah.
There's
That's
just
probably
too
true.
much. I think about who in the United States is winning. Nobody. The people who think they're winning are losing big time. But it's like one of my daughters had tax debt. Worried about it every day. Am I going to be able to pay the rent? Am I going to be able to feed my kids? It's like there's, like literally a foot on your neck every day. How can you be creative and loving and kind to the full extent of your capacity if you're one paycheck away from whatever? So that's why I think pain may outweigh joy. Is there joy? Hell yes. And the more pain you feel, the more vital your joy is, right? I mean, that's how I
More
feel.
evident, at least.
I think the trick is to find out how much pain you can actually hold without being overwhelmed, and hold exactly that much, right? But it's a delicate balance. If I'm not feeling pain, I'm not alive.
Right.
If I'm feeling nothing but pain, I'm not alive.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's where somatic practices come in. Like shaking has been a really helpful somatic practice for me. Obviously, meditation, breath work has actually come into my life since August, and like really dedicated breath work time has really deeply increased my personal capacity. So that's been really helpful. And it's interesting because people don't always, like in the political sphere, when you're on social media, they're not talking about their bodies. They're not talking about the toll that this is taking on them as a human being. And but yeah, I mean, you have to have whatever strategy works for you, and live inside of those lineages, and
How far we have strayed from our true roots.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing about working with the unhoused population that has been really important to me is the mutual aid communities, and honestly, the anarchist communities and the activist communities are some of the most empathetic people I've ever met, and they are deeply hyper local to me in a lot of ways. And so if they're going to go and do something and they're going to help people, I want to build those relationships. I'm going to be down there with them, and I'm going to get into the dirt with them, and I'm going to build those relationships with them, because in the event of a disaster, in the event that we need to completely rebuild society as we know it, which honestly I think we're on the brink of, those are the most capable people I know. And so that's also part of it, is I'm building those networks, I'm building those relationships. And same with the neighborhood emergency teams. Those are the people immediately local to me who say, I want to feel more confident, I want to be more prepared, I want to know what the actual hazards in our neighborhood are, and I want to know all of the people who have the capacity to step up in the same way. And a lot of those people are doing mutual aid and doing activism and going to protests, and I'm noticing that there's more and more crossover between those groups of people than I used to see, and that's good, that's exciting. I think that those communities all do need to continue to support each other, and that helps the likelihood of those fruiting body moments when we all have those deep relationships. But I would also like to see more people cultivating that depth of relationship with the land and figuring out what their access points are to that. And I've talked to some of the other candidates actually, and their campaign staff, and some of the bioregionalists in Portland about the park system and how you don't really get to interact with the park, you interact on the park. and just what would it look like to have that be more participatory, to have, maybe a native plant garden there that is publicly tended, and there's nice signage about how to do that and tools available, or, how do we make this more interactive so it's not just a space, but it is a being that we are all co-creating and collaborating with together. Things that I don't always get to say on the campaign trail, but that I feel really passionate about.
Yeah. Well, that's the point of this podcast.
Yeah.
Is to find the humans and not just the candidates.
I do just want to say that among the biggest highlights have been the chalk murals that I've done with you. I just truly think we set out to make something beautiful, and we really, really did it. We did it, and people loved them. Yeah. It really offered something to the community. I was able to say that we were doing something more creative than lawn signs, and I've been just deeply proud of us for having done that, and so grateful for the idea and the stencils and everything that you brought to that work. But the chalk murals have truly, that's probably my number one highlight of this whole experience.
Oh,
so it's just been doing that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think anyone left here not feeling better
Also that,
from the conversations.
That too.
I'm including us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But coming into an environment where the two of us really want to know what you think, what you feel, what you want to do, it's kind of unfortunately not common. So.
Well, yeah, there was no other candidates' answers to be against when they were here.
What?
No other candidates' answers to be like compared to or in a race against when they were here. They just got to be like their passion on display, right? That was the idea.
Yeah.
But our voices need to be heard. Our cares, our compassion, the depth of our feeling matters, and this embodies it. So that's the piece that's sort of a saving grace for me, but also something I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
That it's so complicated and difficult. But wait, it's not.
But those deep discussions are where things really change. But we aren't going to find ourselves in those deep discussions unless we take the time to be ready to be with each other's pain.
Right.
Yeah, and that's definitely another thing that I've had to keep in sight this whole time is there's, this false sense of urgency. There's a lot of hustle culture. There's a lot of productivity culture and the ways that relates to your value as a person inside of capitalism. And then there's me running this tiny little campaign in District 4 of Portland in this very experimental political moment. And so I have really had to sometimes just take time for myself and say, like, I really need a weekend off. I really need to email these organizers and cancel this event because I cannot show up to the best of my capacity. And I, as a leader, also need to be modeling rest and modeling the ability to have those long form conversations where we can afford to sit down and hold each other's pain.
Right. Not a 60 seconds and swipe up.
Right.
I was wondering if we could ever get through one interview where Patty didn't push the trauma button, that we need to deal with our trauma if we're going to survive and be productive.
Well, but that's true because nobody who is in their trauma and living through their trauma still is going to feel safe enough to even recognize what they need, right? I mean, or to like have a conversation and to feel heard. They can't do it if you're in that much like fear state, trauma state, pain state. It's just ruling over you, and survival will prevent that hope.
So they just popped into my mind. What we're also talking about is social trauma.
Well, yeah.
There's personal trauma, but there's a way in which we're collectively traumatized.
True.
So some of the same thinking that we do about personal trauma, we need to think about social trauma in the same way.
Yeah, and the land also, it needs to be healed in much of the same way.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, it's funny. I think a lot, not funny. I think a lot of healing almost well, the pain, the traumas need to stop, right? Like you can't be healing a trauma that's still going on.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like the land is a perfect example of that because, you know, just like when COVID happened and all of those cars and carbon emissions stopped or, you know, drastically slowed, like it was not very many days before the atmosphere was like, hello, sunshine, and was clearing up and showing us that the earth can do that if we just fucking stop traumatizing it.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky because if we wait indefinitely, then none of that trauma gets processed, right? So I like the example of, you know, if you see a baby floating in the water, like your impulse is going to be to like, you know, pull the baby out of the water. You don't want the baby to drown. But if you see another one, you need to go look upstream and figure out who's throwing babies in the water. Exactly. Even if that means that you let the one in front of you drown, but you still need to grieve the one that drowned. And you need to make sure that you prioritize all of those things in order, right? Like you need to go figure out why it's happening and figure out if you can immediately interrupt it. And if you cannot, then you still need to grieve.
But that's why there's community. Like I can pull that baby. I can yell to the person on the shore, oh my God, there's another baby. And we can quick message people to be like, holy shit, run upstream, right? Because when we're in a community, we don't have to make those decisions. We can actually have capacity for that because we can work together.
Well, that's a really good point because as I was talking with Chat, so the community health assess and treat, they're doing a lot of really good intervention programs and doing medical services in the field for the unhoused population so that they don't have to be transported by an ambulance to the hospital, right? Because that's really expensive. But if they can treat them in the field, then that's a lot less expensive. And then these people try to connect them up with other services. And one of the candidates during this info session raised their hand and said, like, okay, but can't we just interrupt the reasons that they're on the street in the first place? And then Chat doesn't need to do all of this, right? And like, yes, but we're not there yet, right? Like, yes, this is like, that's the end goal and that's what we're working towards. And that's what they're trying to do in connecting people up with services and connecting, you know, doing follow-up appointments and all of those things. And then there's all of these other organizations that are working even further upstream, but you still need the triage in the meantime. And you can't defund the triage in the middle of, you know, trying to deal with all the root cause. So absolutely, community is so important, and community makes it possible to designate, like, okay, you really feel this grief right now, and that's super important. And we need you in our community to feel that grief. And that's sacred. That's important. And you need a space to do that. And if you need support or you need to switch out and you need to not look at that for a while, that's also okay. But it is something we need to grieve. And it happens alongside everything else because life doesn't stop. Right. It keeps going. So yeah, it's a hard thing to hold all at once, but that's why we don't hold any of this as a single person. Mm-hmm. It's impossible to hold all of the world's pain as a single person, but we can do it as a whole world.
It is?
I know, I've tried and I would not recommend.
Breakthrough.
I would not recommend. No martyrs for the cause. One thing that was a really powerful moment for me in some of the just retreating inward that I needed to do is I went to this event where we were doing breath work in a group setting, and there were about 8 or 9 of us in the room maybe, and they were really asking us to imagine transforming the world's pain, the world's shadows in our breath, and like breathing it in and holding it in our heart and asking it what it needs and offering that wisdom back out in the exhale, right? And so just doing this transformational alchemical process in a group setting for an hour. We just sat there together and did this. And I was really remarking on how I, as one person, have a really hard time not feeling despair if I let myself feel all of the world's pain at once. But a group of 8 or 9 of us, no problem. Like I felt so held in that. I felt so so held, so protected, so able, and so resourced
Safe.
in that group of people to do that work.
That's what ritual is for.
Yeah.
Is to collectivize energy.
And it was a really powerful
Whether it's
experience.
down wherever you're going in that larger community, or whether it's in a group doing breath work. But the collectivizing of it is critical, because we are connected. I mean, that's the reality, but we don't experience ourselves as connected. And then we're very weak and vulnerable.
Yeah.
You've been doing a lot.
Yeah.
Now, as soon as you recover, you're going to be just great. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. People have started asking me like, "Well, what's next for you?" And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously, there's the possibility I could get elected. I think the election, as far as I'm concerned, is anyone's game with ranked choice voting. We don't have the data to really do accurate predictions, and it's like a 1 in 7 billion chance that you'd pick the right set of 13 to have won this election. So it's really up for grabs as far as I'm concerned. But I think about what is the best use of my energy going forward. I want to continue doing community organizing, but I also need to be personally resourced in ways that are going to support me. And I want to exist outside of capitalism, but that isn't an option right now for really any of us. And we're all complicit in the harm. And so what are the offsets that I need to make for myself to feel safe and healthy and well, and like I'm contributing without, falling into savior complex narratives and all these things. So it's very complicated, but right now I feel most drawn to careers in something like waste management, especially sewage treatment, honestly, just because I'm very curious about the ways that we can work with the land to do more composting, and instead of treating everything with chemicals, because as I took this permaculture class recently, and my permaculture teacher said the best thing you can do for the land is pee on the land. The second best thing you can do for the land is poop on the land. And the part of it is just that the phosphorus and nitrates are so depleted out of the soil that like your urine does actually give that back. And but like if we put it in the fresh water and then you send it out to the rivers, now it's pollution. And you just caused that pollution with a whole bunch of fresh water and a whole bunch of electricity. And you didn't need to do that. And you're also mixing it with all of the kinds of toxic number 2 waste that cause even more problems. So it's like we need to come up with better solutions for this, and it needs to happen without chemicals, and it needs to happen without polluting our rivers. And surprise, surprise, nature has already solved this problem for us, and we just need to use the strategies available to compost this. And I actually went to a festival recently where it was about 400 or 500 attendees. They had compost toilets for the entire event, and it was really well done. They were extremely well maintained. And honestly, I'm just like, if that's my job, is to just compost our shit, like, all right, I'm here for it. Like I can do that.
Those are traditional agricultural processes,
right. So that might be something I look into, just in terms of like where can I help with that work and help that transition back to quote unquote normal. But yeah, and other than that, I'll just be kind of keeping my eyes open.
If bullshit was useful, politics would be useful.
Yeah. And I think too, the really important thing for me that I'm also just constantly in the process of learning is you have to be passionate, and you have to be tender, and you have to call people in. You might not agree with them on X, Y, and Z, but you might agree with them on ABC. And how do you use that to call them in? Because the second that you make an enemy of them, or you pit yourself against them, you've lost. You've both lost. Yeah.
Right.
And so how can we be building these unlikely allyships? And how can we listen to each other, even if I disagree with you over here. I don't have to disagree with you over here. And anytime anyone asks me, like, well, how are you going to collaborate with the other people on the council? That's what I say. Is like, there are ideas that I surprisingly agree with this conservative candidate running against me over here. There are places where I'm like, actually, yeah, you're right. We should have more staff. And so thinking about, not just writing someone off because you disagree with them about one thing, and the whole part of building community is not treating people like they're expendable. So if you imagine I'm stuck on a spaceship with this person, how are you going to collaborate? And I think that's how we should be building our communities. We can't keep building communities like we can just keep exiling and ghosting each other. It's not going to work. So that's the really tricky thing, because you want to be angry. You want to call it a fight. You want to call it a battle. But ultimately, it's a calling in. It's a compassion. It's a tenderness.
It's just amazing to me how much goodness survives the constant assault that we're under every day. It's really, resilience is remarkable, and it's something I count on when we make that resilience open the doors and allow it to address the real things that we're talking about. So it's an honor to be intersectional with you, whatever the hell that means.
We did it. The series is officially complete. Jerry just used intersectional without referencing traffic.
Exactly.
So.
You know what I mean. We need to use language that working people understand, and intersectionality is not that word. I'm sorry. See, you tapped my inherent resistance, not to the idea, which I understand completely, but to abstract language. You know, I've been quoting the little Adrian Rich quote, "This is the oppressor's language." And it is used to keep people in their place.
I've been reading this book called Ancestral Memory, and I'm forgetting the author's name right now, but an indigenous author who's who's writing in English and talking about how, that's an oppressive language, but also the way you use words can become indigenous, right? So there's all of this complexity, like how much is it the language and how much is it the way you use the language? And I think the most important part of all of that is just sitting in the complexity of it all, like recognizing we can't make easy distinctions about any one thing because it's become something else now. Like one of my favorite examples, a friend of mine wrote a poem about the dilemma of wanting to pull a plastic water bottle out of the stream, but realizing that it had been there so long as to create a whole ecosystem inside of itself, and how much more disruptive is it then to pull the plastic bottle out of the stream, and just the tension of that, right? Like this is not, we're not dealing with any simple problems. We're dealing with incredibly complex problems, and we're dealing with types of harm and mitigations to harm that we don't understand the full extent of. And we're going to have to make small experiments and try things out and really honestly look at what happens and say, yes, that worked. And yes, these are the pieces we want to keep from that. And these are the pieces that need to move on. And these are the new experiments we want to try. And I hope that with this new experiment in Portland's government, that we aren't sort of doing a rubber band situation where we change everything and then that didn't work, so we change everything else, and really try to work in a middle place of collaboration and understanding, and not acting from a sense of urgency, but acting from a sense of longevity, and starting the process on 500-year work.
Yes.
And not fourth quarter profits. That'd
Yeah,
be nice.
Definitely not that.
And not what?
And not fourth quarter profits.
Oh, yeah, there's that.
Well,
I'm so inspired, I'm going to do something.
No.
we should go vote next month. How about that?
I should go, I don't have
Or
to
this
go.
month.
I can do
That's
that.
true.
I can do that from here.
That's true. That's not a thing
but
for us.
what I'm
It's still
saying
in
is
my
it's
head to go vote.
inspiring to dig down into the muck. There's a lot of muck but there are important things in that muck.
I think it's relieving in a way, right? We talked a little bit about, the one great name that we apply to things, and that's just a symptom of our, great white man history bullshit that we do. And it's like, it's relieving to be like, oh no, that's not actually how anything happens. Like,
Right.
you're chasing something that's not real if you think I can only make change by doing this really big thing. And so if I'm not going to get my name in lights for having done that thing, why would I apply myself? Like, I don't think anyone's thinking that directly, but that's how we act, right? We think like, well, why would I do that? I can't make enough change, because we think change happens by names like Joan of Arc and stuff like that, but it's not real. There, I used a woman. Huh, funny. In my example
but
of
things did
great
not
white man
go
history.
well for her.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
there's
that's
that.
fair. But we attribute change to these big names, to these big events. But that's just not the totality of how
No, it's
change
not
happens. It's
at
person
all.
to person, and it's the spreading of good ideas and deep conversations and compassion for each other, and the accepting of our reality being what it is. I've come up against that a lot lately, this idea that we think, like, we get stuck and unable to make change because we just, it's weird. It's like we get stuck almost like, this shouldn't have been this way. It shouldn't have gone that way, like our traumas, right? And we get stuck thinking, well, it shouldn't have been that way. I'm so angry that it shouldn't have been that way. But once we're like, yeah, it shouldn't have,
Yeah,
but
it
it
was.
was.
Yeah.
Then we can start taking a step forward, right? We're so ready to suing, we sue each other, right? Like, I have to blame somebody. I have to make somebody pay for that. We have to fix it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be angry if I don't have a way to make this right. And that releasing and accepting is a thing we're not good at.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just to say this, I have been very surprised to hear how common it is for one government entity to sue another government entity, like for the county to sue the city or the city to sue the state. Like, that makes no sense to me, and that is a supreme waste of taxpayer dollars in a lot of ways. I can't, can we just find ways to collaborate? Can we just figure this out? That's been really shocking to me. I didn't realize that was even a thing.
I mean, that's like the drifting away of our humanity, because you're not even humans dealing with humans in that situation.
Right?
It is.
You're lawyers dealing with lawyers. Yeah.
Well, and legal entities dealing with legal entities instead. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. But there's a lot of really good people running. There's a lot of really good people who have stepped up. There's a lot of really good people who won't get elected and will continue their tenderness and their radical empathy for this city. So I'm really hopeful that change will happen.
So
Yes.
I am heavily, this is author Eduardo Galeano, means a lot to me, and he talks about the politics of militant tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you've reminded me of. And I identify with that, the politics of militant tenderness.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of BIPOC authors that have helped me understand the necessity for that. I don't think it didn't come supernatural to me. It was something I had to learn, but I think it's really, really deeply important, and important to name the role of the body and the vulnerability and the trust and the land in all of these experiences.
Wow.
Yeah, talk about just grief as a constant evolving tender process. So yeah, I mean, grief has definitely colored my experience of the world in the last 4 years, and I think for a lot of people,
It's a teacher.
yeah, it's been profound. It definitely broke me open in very good and very difficult ways. So.
Yeah, that's, and someone sent me a poem after Lee died 3 years ago. Your heart doesn't break, it breaks open.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Are there any final pleas for votes that you want to say? If someone's not convinced by now that you'd be an amazing counselor for District 4 here in Portland.
If they're not convinced, to hell with them.
No, not to hell with them. Here's your last
We're calling
chance.
them in, right?
We're going to call them in.
Yeah.
Andra, go ahead and give that final pitch. Tell the voters of Portland in District 4 why you should be their counselor.
Yes, my name is Andra Vltavín, and I'm coming from a queer and non-binary perspective. I'm coming from a climate activism background, and I have been doing a lot of volunteer work with the unhoused community through mutual aid. And I also did 6 months volunteering at the Columbia River Correctional Facility to see our justice system and its injustices from the inside. And I'm coming at this city council position with a deep sense of empathy and a deep desire for sustainable change in our city. And so if you'd like to join me in that rally, then I would love to have your vote. And I am urging you to vote bravely. You can vote for 6 people, and I would highly, highly suggest that you put the underdog candidates up toward the front of your 6 so that they have the best opportunity to have your vote and to stay in the race long enough so that they are not eliminated. And you might want to put candidates who are a little better known on the lower section of your list because they are likely going to get through the initial elimination rounds. So please be thoughtful. Please be brave. We have, as Jerry said, a once in many lifetimes opportunity to change the entire government. We can have 12 brand new voices on the city council this year, and I am urging you to take that opportunity to be brave and to exercise your power as a participatory citizen in the city.
That's really good info to have. Yeah. All right. Well, is it the final wrap? I think we did it, guys.
We did it!
We spoke truth to goodness. Thank you for joining us on Speaking Truth to Goodness for this enlightening conversation with Andra Vltavín. As we close this season, we reflect on Andra's innovative campaign for City Council, a campaign that stood out for its dedication to sustainability, equity, and community-focused solutions. Andra's commitment to non-traditional campaigning methods and direct engagement with the community has not only highlighted the urgent issues facing Portland, but also demonstrated a viable path to addressing them through politics and activism. We hope that today's episode inspires you to think differently about political engagement and the potential for change within our own communities. Please continue to support and engage with efforts that push for a more just and sustainable world. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this episode, and follow us on Instagram. Let's keep speaking truth to goodness, because goodness is